There's gold in them there hills. A phrase that for gold prospectors is like a moth to the flame. But how far would you go to get it? And this one starts a little slow, but just hang on for the wild ride at the end. In the spring of 1900, Harry Culp, along with his team of 3 other broke prospectors, were holed up in a shack in Wrangell, Alaska. In his account of this story, he just calls his friends Fred, Charlie, and John. And one night in April, Charlie burst through the door, all excited, and says, "Hey fellas, I have been on the trail of this Indian for the last month, trying to get him to tell me where he found this big piece of gold quartz that he's got at his camp. And I never said anything about it before because I wanted to get the story from him first. And today he spilled the beans. He told me to go up to Thomas Bay and camp on the Patterson River on the right side. Then go upriver about 8 miles and turn to the high mountains. Go up about 1.5 miles and you will see a lake in the shape of a half moon. Plenty of those stones like I found on a slide there." Now, Thomas Bay is known by Native Americans as the Bay of Death because about 150 years prior, a landslide down one of the mountains wiped out a village in the area and killed about 500 people. Well, of course, any prospector would be willing to stampede at the mere whisper of gold anywhere. And Harry and John and Fred are no exceptions to the rule. And all 4 of them talk the matter over, and they decide they're going to send Charlie to go look the prospect over. And while he's gone, Harry, John, and Fred will rustle work somewhere to get another grub stake and pay off the old one. A grub stake is when someone invests in a mining expedition for a cut of the profit. So in early May, Charlie loads his stuff into a canoe and, having good weather, leaves Wrangell for Thomas Bay, which lies about 50 miles northwest of his starting point. And he packs 3 months worth of supplies. But he says, "If I find something sooner, I will come back and let you know as soon as I can." And they all agree that if they don't hear anything from him in 3 months, they will send out a search party. So after Charlie leaves, John and Fred get themselves a lumberjacking contract, and Harry gets a job in the Wrangell sawmill. And things go along as planned until one Sunday afternoon at the beginning of June. The 3 men are at home in the shack going about their business when in the door stumbles Charlie. No coat, no hat, and looking like he has been through hell. He doesn't say hi or anything. He just heaves a big chunk of quartz into the corner of the room and says, "Get me something to eat. I am all in and I want to rest." According to Harry, Charlie looks completely done. And after Charlie eats, he goes to sleep without saying a word about his trip. The other men pick up the piece of quartz from the corner and take a good look at it. And woo, for a prospector, it is a thing of beauty. It is shot through with gold specks like a freckle-faced kid. Needless to say, they are excited to start looking for more of this. So just before dark, the men decide to go down to the beach and collect Charlie's gear and the rest of his supplies. There should be some left because he's only been gone a month. And when he came up to the cabin, all he had in his hands was that piece of quartz. But the canoe, except for the oars, is completely empty. And Harry and his friends don't get much sleep that night, partly because they're so excited and partly because Charlie doesn't stop snoring. The next morning, the 3 friends have a really hard time getting Charlie out of bed for breakfast. But when he finally does roll out, he just eats, borrows a coat and a hat, and leaves the house without saying a word and without answering any of the questions that his friends are just peppering at him. And Harry, Fred, and John are so sure that they are about to get rich, they don't even go to work that day, and instead sit in the shack all day and pass that sparkling piece of rock back and forth between them, each of them dreaming about what they're going to do with their share of the fortune, and waiting for Charlie to come back and give them the scoop. They can't wait to get the skinny on this one. And sometime in the afternoon, Charlie comes back, sits down, and matter-of-factly says, "Fellas, The SS Drigo will be on her way south tomorrow morning. Can you give me enough money to get a ticket to Seattle? I am through with Alaska, and I never want to see it again. I'll tell you about my trip to Thomas Bay and where I found that quartz, but my advice to you is to forget about it. It will never do you any good and will only cause you mental and physical pain. If we were not partners, I would never open my lips about this trip and what I found. But if you promise not to mention my name in connection with anything I'm about to tell you, or mention the name Thomas Bay to me again, I'll give you the straight of my experience up there. Judge for yourself my saneness, because this is the most astounding thing you've ever heard. And as far as I'm concerned, is beyond me to reason it out. Don't ask me any questions to prolong my story longer than it takes to tell it, as I want to leave Alaska and forget it if I can. I will try to make the telling plain enough. This is Charlie's story. The first night after leaving Wrangell found me in Ideal Cove. Next night, I reached Muddy River in time to make camp again. The third night, I hit Ruth Island in Thomas Bay. I spent the next day looking up Patterson River for a suitable place to camp, which I found a quarter mile up from the tidewater on the right-hand side, looking up the river. Broke camp on Ruth Island the next day and moved up to the place I'd picked out the day before. Put up my tent, packed up my outfit, and left the canoe on the riverbank. The next day I spent cooking beans, cutting wood, and making things comfortable for a long stay. As it looked like rain, I wanted to get things fixed to keep dry. It started to rain that night and just kept it up for days. I lost track of time as each day was just like the one before, and the roar of the river and the wind through the timber just about drove me bugs. So I put in most of my time sleeping. Finally, the weather broke and I got out. Spent several days in trying to find the old Indians' Half Moon Lake, but couldn't get it spotted. I did find, about 2 miles from camp up the river and about a mile in, a lake shaped like the letter S. On the creek, coming out from the lower end, I panned some pretty good color. As I figured, not enough to get excited about, but an indication of gold in the country. Talk about a dead country? That sure is. There doesn't seem to be any life in there at all. You might spend all day in the timber without seeing a squirrel. I was getting kind of tired of rice, beans, and bacon, so I made up my mind to go over to a ridge about 8 miles east of the S-shaped lake and get a few grouse, as I thought I heard some hooting over there when I was at the head of the lake. I left come the next morning, which was a fine sunny day. I took only the rifle with me, and sure enough, when I came to the ridge, there were a few grouse hooting. I shot 2 and had gotten them. I begged another one, and it fell down the ridge about 100 yards before it hung up. While on my way down to pick it up, I found that piece of quartz. Now, up to that time, I'd paid little attention as to what the country I was in looked like, as it was so heavily timbered and brushy. The formation didn't show up, and I had no tools with me to uncover it. The top of an old snag had broken off and fallen, scraping the top moss and loose dirt for a space of about 8 feet wide and 18 to 20 feet long, uncovering this quartz ledge, which is where I found this piece. This ledge was worked smooth by a glacier at one time. I couldn't find anything to break a piece off with, so I used the butt of my gun to get that piece. And in doing so, I broke the butt of my gun, ruining it for future use. This didn't worry me, nay, as I know there's not game in this country larger than a grouse, and damn few of them. My first thought was of the richness of this quartz, and of you fellows, and getting back to town so I could round you all up so we could get busy on it. After looking over and enjoying the feeling of knowing I had just made a rich find, I covered the ledge up again with moss, limbs, and rotten chunk. Finishing that job, I thought I would climb the ridge directly over the ledge and get my landmarks so I could come back to it again. Or you where it was if anything should happen to me. This I did, climbing straight up over the ledge on the ridge till I reached the top, which was about 600 feet above where I found the ledge. I looked down below me and picked out a big tree with a brushy top, taller than the rest of the trees and about 50 feet to the right of the ledge. Looking out over the top of this tree from where I stood, I could see Frederick Sound, Cape of the Straight Light, Vanderput Spit, and turning a little to the left, I could see Sequoia Island from the mouth of the Wrangell Narrows. Satisfied with that, I turned half around to get a back sight on some mountain peaks. And lying below me, on the other side of the ridge from the ledge, was a half-moon lake the Indian had told me about. And right there, fellas, I got the scare of my life. And I hope to God I never see or go through the likes of it again. Swarming up the ridge towards me from the lake were the most hideous creatures. I couldn't call them anything but devils, as they were neither men nor monkeys, yet looked like both. They were entirely sexless, their bodies covered in long, coarse hair, except where the scabs and running sores had replaced it. Each one seeming to reach out for me and striving to be the first one to get me. The air was full of their cries, and the stench of their sores and their bodies made me faint from the noxious fumes rising upwind. I forgot my broken gun and tried to use it on the first ones, and then I threw it at them and I turned and ran. God, how I did run. I could feel their hot breath on my back, their long, claw-like fingers scraping my back. The smell from their steaming, stinking bodies was making me sick, while the noises they made, yelling, screaming, and breathing, drove me mad. Reason left me. How I reached the canoe, or how I hung onto that piece of quartz, is a mystery to me. When I came to, it was night, and I was lying in the bottom of my canoe, drifting between Thomas Bay and Sequoia Island, cold, hungry, and crazy for a drink of water. But only to satisfy the latter urge, I started for Wrangell, and here I am. You no doubt think I'm either crazy or lying. All I can say is there's the quartz. Never let me hear the name of Thomas Bay again. And for God's sake, help me get away tomorrow on that boat. And if your thirst for terrifying Bigfoot tales is not quenched, click here for more. And we will see you again on the In-Between.